Good afternoon. My name is Kristin O'Connell.
And I'm Susan Winchell-Sweeney.
And we are Archaeology Research and Collection Technicians here at the New York State Museum. It is our pleasure to be with you today and to be part of the Women of Science series.
We are going to talk to you about a collaborative archaeological project involving two different survey techniques. One, a controlled surface artifact collection, sometimes known as a pedestrian survey, and the other, a geophysical survey involving a magnetic susceptibility meter. Both of these techniques are considered non-destructive. In other words, there's no digging involved.
Now we're going to step aside so the camera can zoom into the presentation. There's a lot of detailed maps and artifacts we'd really like you guys to focus on. Enjoy the show.
Douw Site is located on Papscony Island, and it is important to note that Papscony Island is Mohican land. The island is culturally significant to the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation, displaced from these homelands, and is now based in Wisconsin. With this fact in mind, we would like to read an official statement of land acknowledgement. It is with gratitude and humility that we acknowledge that we are learning, speaking, and gathering on the ancestral homelands of the Mohican people, who are the indigenous peoples of this land. Despite tremendous hardship in being forced from here, today the community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Munsee community. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors, past and present, as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all.
Now the area of interest lies southeast of Albany, New York, on an alluvial plain adjacent to the Hudson River. The land experienced ages of pre-contact Native American cultural activity, agricultural use by the Mohican people, and the soils witnessed scouring floods and ice flows. With the establishment of Fort Orange by the Dutch colonists during the 17th century, near what is now downtown Albany, this nearby land became an attractive resource. By the spring of 1637, Van Rensselaer purchased Papscony from the Mohicans. The island contains hundreds of acres of undeveloped land and many buried and preserved archaeological sites. Presently, the Open Space Institute and Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation are working on an effective, long-term preservation strategy to protect the land from encroaching development. In the late winter, early spring of 2019, a collaborative research project was established between the New York State Museum, the Open Space Institute, and the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation to support these preservation goals. The island is rich in Mohican history. However, the 18th century Volkert P. Douw Site is the focus of this Women of Science presentation, and is now part of a larger study focusing on the impact of slavery in the Hudson Valley. Douw was a politician, a military leader, and mayor of Albany during the 18th century. A 17th census, seen here, records 14 enslaved people of color for Douw. According to records, the Douw family held 11 people in slavery a year before he died in 1801. Historic maps show evidence of a structure in the vicinity of Douw's property until 1850. The Archaeology of Slavery in the Hudson River Valley project has the broad goal of exploring the material evidence of slavery as it existed along the Hudson from the 17th through the early 19th centuries. Some of the least understood histories in the Albany area involve the lives of the hundreds of people of color who lived and died enslaved. By using archaeological data recovered from sites such as Douw Site, this project aims to address voids in historical scholarship on the material lives of the enslaved in the 18th and 19th century New York. Now, it's very important to note that connecting recovered material, artifacts, directly to an individual is not an obvious process and entails supportive research, documentation, and accurate context from where the objects were found. Usually, an object doesn't have its owner's history marked all over it.
The first non-destructive technique we employed at the Douw site was magnetic susceptibility, or MagSus, or MS for short. So what is it exactly? This non-invasive geophysical technique is becoming increasingly more popular for archaeological investigations in the United States. It's been around for quite a while in Europe. In very simple terms, an MS meter, shown here, measures how magnetizable soil is, which can be a marker of past human activity. MS enhancement of soils is related to longevity and concentration of human occupation of a particular archaeological site, but other factors such as soil and geology also influence detection of magnetically enhanced soils. Soils that contain ferrous or iron objects will be more magnetizable, of course, but the chemical processes involved with fire or fired artifacts, like ceramics or bricks, also increase the magnetizability of soil. Even organic remains, like wooden posts, for example, can be detected with MS if there are magnetite-producing bacteria in the soil. MS is an active geophysical method. The surface scanning probe is placed on the ground in direct contact with the soil, a signal is emitted, and returned with a measurement recorded in a data logger. By examining historical maps and other records, we were able to determine the probable location of the site, or at least which field where the Douw house structure may likely have been built. We established a 100-meter by 30-meter grid using a total station, a traditional piece of optical survey equipment, something a land surveyor would use, and placed wooden stakes at our starting and end points. We also put a datum inside the tree line, 10 meters west of the origin point, so we can return in the future and reestablish the grid if necessary. This is illustrated in the left image you see on the screen. The actual locations of each of our MS readings is shown on the right. Beginning at the southwestern corner of the grid, we walked south to north and north to south in a zigzag pattern, moving 2 meters east at the end of each line. The lines are called transects, taking a measurement every 5 meters. Long cloth tapes, 100-meter and 50-meter, were laid on the ground and used as guides. The measurements were then recorded in a digital file, downloaded to a computer, and processed in Geographic Information System software, or otherwise known as GIS. Shown on the right are the actual results. We definitely found a hotspot, and hopefully, perhaps, the location of the Douw site. But a note on the left panel of the frame that you see here, as well as those you'll be seeing on the following slides. One of the secondary objectives of this project was to demonstrate the speed and efficacy of MS for surveying archaeological sites to the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation. Data was intentionally suppressed from the original survey to simulate a survey, taking readings along transects every 10 meters apart. It took us half a day to complete the survey at the 2 by 5 meter interval spacing, but increasing to a 10 by 10 meter interval would likely only take a few hours. The resolution is obviously coarser, but still appears to yield meaningful results. A systematic pedestrian survey, or walkover, of the same area was done the following month, in June 2019. Pedestrian surveys are often the first thing done when a new archaeological site is discovered, but in this case, obviously, it was the second. It is important to note the cornfield had been plowed, but not yet planted. Each artifact found on the surface was flagged, assigned an ID number, and a preliminary identification made. This information was recorded along with the location of each artifact using a centimeter level mapping grade global positioning system. A total of 794 artifacts at 549 discrete locations were discovered. 486 artifacts were collected, and identification was further refined in the lab. Much of the architectural material, exclusive of nails, brick fragments, whole bricks, and cut stone, was left in place and only representative samples collected. As with the MS data, the GPS data was incorporated into the GIS. A strong visual spatial correlation between the surface finds and MS hotspots is clearly evident. What you'll see in the following slides is a small selection of the results of GIS database spatial queries based on artifact material type. For the ceramic artifacts particularly, these queries can serve as proxies for temporal analysis. The earliest ceramics, tin glazed, creamware, jackfield, and pearlware, spatially correlate to the highest readings in the MS data. We believe this analysis identifies a location of the house constructed on the island in the late 18th century, which may have been occupied by Douw's enslaved people.
Okay, here is our first plot, and this contains clamshell fragments. As you can see, the shell was found right around the strongest mag-sus readings. During the surface collection at Douw Site, clamshells were the only evidence of food waste on the surface. As archaeologists, we are very interested in table waste and food processing debris, such as animal faunal, shells, nuts, seeds, because it yields information on diet, preferences, and availability. Butcher marks on animal faunal indicate a time frame and what type of meal was prepared. Now, this single blue dot in the red area represents the only fragment of buff-bodied earthenware with tin glaze. The fragment is part of a small square wall tile with barely any glaze or pattern left on the surface. The decoration is most likely Delft, Dutch origin. Without any of the pattern, the pottery production date range for Delft tiles is pretty large. Dutch tiles were produced from the beginning of the 17th century to the early 19th century. The tiles decorated fireplaces, mantels, stoves, and hung on walls as triptych. There are basically 3 individual tiles forming a scene. The glaze is made with a mixture of tin oxide, lead, sand, and salt. Here's an image of the artifact to the right, and as you can see, there's barely anything left of the tin glaze. And the image on the left is from a private collection donated to the museum this past winter. The tile is from Leiden, Netherlands, and dates circa 1785. The landscape within the circle medallion is a diagnostic style. Now, this next plot shows 3 black dots in the same vicinity as the tin glazed tile. These are red earthenware sherds with a jackfield black glaze. This type of ceramic has a dark red paste interior, thin body, usually, and deep glassy black glaze that was seen on 18th century teaware. This image has the sherds at the left. The beautiful dark red paste is not well represented here in the photo, unfortunately. And the image to the right represents an image of a jackfield decorated pot. It's important to note, though, in the 1870s and 1880s, a revival of the jackfield type glaze occurred, this time on terracotta, which possibly could be those 2 fragments below the rim. And next plot, we have these light blue dots represent a very popular ceramic type that spans the late 18th century into the 19th century. Pearlware glazed ceramics have a blue tinted glaze and were used for dinnerware, teaware, service, and wash basins, and toiletry. Decoration and patterns were abundant and are highly diagnostic. Again, the concentration of these artifacts were found near the highest mag-sus readings. Now, here are a few examples of the pearlware sherds recovered from the pedestrian survey at Douw. Starting with the left image, shows 3 pearlware sherds at top that are hand-painted polychrome floral decoration. The subdued hues of yellow, brown, and olive green you see indicates a pre-1830s production. The sherds below have a hand-painted cobalt blue floral decoration. Though the photography shows them brilliantly white, these 2 still have the pearlware glaze. The large blue brushstroke pattern spans from pearlware to whiteware in the early part of the 19th century. Now, heading over to the top right, we have 19th century dipped, refined earthenware sherds. The surface decoration seen here was created with slips. Slip is a decoration made up of different colored clays or clays dyed with mineral oxides. And when mineral oxides, I mean it could be lead, copper, iron, or magnesium. The decoration can cover large portions of the ceramic, as seen here, or have more elaborate decoration, such as trail designs, strips, and pores. Now heading to the lower right image is a blue transfer print proware sherds. Transfer print was a process that allowed people to obtain scenery of their choice to decorate their table. It's an underglaze printing process that began in Staffordshire, England in the late 18th century and revolutionized the availability of ceramics. And because the study of transfer print ceramics is so abundant, we were able to identify a pattern with the very edge of a plate sherd. This plate sherd is circled in blue, and it's the border pattern that's described as a repeating geometric, and it's associated with the central pattern you see here called Gun Dog by the potter Enoch Wood. It's a British view, and the production date ranges between 1818 and 1846. Now, it's very important to note that just using the marley or border pattern to find the correct central pattern and pottery maker is tricky. A lot of the border patterns have been used by multiple pottery makers and different central scenes. Luckily, this particular one is distinct to Enoch Wood's.
Now here you can see the location of whiteware fragments. Whiteware dates solidly to the mid-19th century, and as you can see, has a much wider spread than the 17th and 18th century artifacts shown in the previous slides. The greater spatial distribution of the whiteware may represent a change in the configuration of the house at a later date and time.
Okay, and here's examples of whiteware sherds and their decoration. Starting with the left, as always, of course, shows impressed and embossed edgeware. The green painted is impressed with straight lines. The blue painted is embossed pattern, and the blue painted unmolded straight lines to the far right is seen made during the late 19th century. In the right image, we see transfer print with chrome colors, so production range about 1828 and on. Every popular blue continued on from the pro-war years, and now we see red, greens, brown, and black represented. The thing to take away from these ceramic sherds is the question of who was using these plates, cups, and saucers. Our research brought us here looking for the 18th century occupation, but we found evidence of an early 19th century occupation as well, maybe a tenant farmer. Seen here are other types of whiteware glazed ceramics found at the site. The left image, bright hand-painted chrome colors found on whiteware, such as cobalt blue rim and the red and green floral pattern. The floral decoration seen in this image has a black stem. This pattern style is post-1830s. If you remember, back in the pearlware artifacts, the dulled hand-painted U's contained an olive brown stem. Over to the right shows 3 different decorations. The 2 left fragments have a pale blue raised botanical decoration called sprig molding, having a production range of 1840s, 1860s. The white granite base sherd is seen far right top. It has Gothic panels giving it a distinct form and thought as a more sturdier earthenware during travels than the fragile whiteware. And lastly, the small rim sherd at the bottom right in the image has a decoration called decalorama. It has a production range solidly into the late 19th century, about 1880s, 1890s and on. It's very faint evidence of the pattern. The decoration is easily removed because it is above the glaze, unlike the transfer print you saw before, which is underneath the glaze.
As mentioned previously, most of the architectural material was left in place, and we only collected a representative sample, but all of it was mapped. The distribution pattern is consistent with that of the whiteware, and the location of this material likely correlates with the earlier structure, as well as the speculative addition or reconfiguration to the south of the highest Magsus readings.
Okay, so these last few slides are of artifacts that have not been plotted yet, but we wanted to make sure we could give the audience at least a little bit more eye candy. So this left image, starting from the very top, is undecorated base sherd of European porcelain. In the middle is export Chinese porcelain, dating to the late 18th century, with that trellis pattern for the rim, and the classic Canton cloud and rain border pattern. seen during the early 19th century. On the bottom row, more Chinese export porcelain with that brilliant cobalt blue hand paint.
A cool fact about porcelain: how it was made, meaning what is the chemical makeup of the ceramic body and glaze, expresses differently when viewed under ultraviolet light. European porcelain has a rosy violet color. Chinese porcelain glows a deep violet, and bone china, which is not represented here in this image, shines a bright white. So through science, we can confirm without a doubt which type of porcelain we have.
So heading over to the image to the right shows a few glass bottle fragments made in the early to mid 1800s. At the far left is a dark olive or black glass bottle base. It possibly contained alcohol or sarsaparilla and appears to be a mold-blown bottle. Here are examples of whole vessels which this fragment could possibly represent. In the middle, we see a light olive lip of a wine bottle with a flattened applied finish. And this term means a little hot molten glass would be placed on top of the neck of the bottle. At the far right is a small square base of a vial. It is light aqua with an open pontal scar visible. This represents an offhand blown bottle, meaning a glob of molten glass is placed on the end of a long stick known as a pontal. A blowpipe is connected to the end of the stick, and the glassmaker blew into the blowpipe to form the vessel. And again, our questions for this entire collection is who used these items and for how long? The upper left image shows white ball clay pipe bowl fragments and a stem fragment. The bowl's fragments have a 19th century decoration. The dark brown two-hole button in the middle is a Goodyear hard rubber button. On the button is a press mark of 1831 patent, and the production period, however, is during the 1850s into 1870s. Next is a melt glass four-hole shirt button dating to the 1840s and on, and next to the melt glass is the brass disc button plated with the eye missing. Now the lower right image, more glass fragments from left to right. First, there's a fragment of cobalt blue lip of a bottle, probably mineral water, and has an applied blob top finish. The glass in the middle is a dark green paneled bottle with embossing lettering that might be a bitters bottle and produced in the mid-19th century. And lastly, we see an olive bottle lip that has applied bead or blob finish as well. And these are our last artifacts we get to show you today. So over on the left shows brown and buff-bodied stonewares, different glazes and decoration. We see a stamped label on a body shirt from a bottle, a lip fragment of another bottle, and a thick brown lead glazed storage lid, dead center. Farthest to the right, in the left image, still, is a couple of sherds with hand-painted cobalt decoration on salt-glazed storage vessels, and below them is a salt-glazed body sherd with, hopefully you can see it, it's a pressed decoration, almost a rouletting. Lastly, the right image shows redwares with brown lead-glazed interiors. Probably utilitarian kitchenwares, one of the hardest earthenwares to pin down an exact production date range due to it being produced everywhere and for a long period of time.
Our planned future work at Papscony Island includes a ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, survey in this coming fall. After analyzing these results in conjunction with the MS data and the pedestrian survey data, we will follow with ground truthing, a limited scientific excavation in the spring of 2021. Again, the island is a protected space, and archaeological work is a regulated activity, so a targeted, focused approach to excavation is essential, which these non-destructive techniques allow.
So, if you allow us just a moment.
There is one question.
Oh, excellent. Go ahead, please.
Who do you think used it and what for? So it's more of a general question. So when you mentioned...
So if you mean the artifacts, I'm assuming, right?
I think so.
Okay. So, like we said, the artifacts don't exactly tell us physically who touched these objects, who held these objects, who used them. So what we're relying on is location, 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 where we find them. So because we found this artifact, and we'll say it was one of the transfer prints, it was found within the hotspot from the Mag Sus, from the historical maps of the ownership at the time, and then based on the age of the artifact, we can say, so it's more 18th century, we're heading into the Douw occupation, and like as we said, wondering what type of building is this? The map just shows a little tiny square. It doesn't tell us if it was an outbuilding, if it was an overseer's building, if it was a tenant farmer. So our first objective was to get these objects to see what date range we have in the hot center. And then, by all these combinations, we come to a conclusion. So at the moment, the more 19th century objects, saying that the transfer prints, the whitewares, that's looking toward as best educated guess. And this is just the very beginning of our analysis.
Exactly. This is very preliminary stages of an archaeological study. Our final stages would be the actual excavation itself, but again, very, very targeted based on the information that we're gathering now.
Ideally, finding structural evidence or a privy. A privy would be, as everyone says, a garbage pit, and then that is fantastic for historic archaeologists.
And one distinction too between the archaeology that our curator of archaeology does, going back 13,000 years, is that we have the advantage of using historical documents. I think that's the one major distinction. So being able to access historic maps really informs, and other documents as well, in addition to everything else we're doing in the field.
Yeah.
Well, we would also like to thank our partners and collaborators.
Yeah, without them, this is a complete group effort. We are just very lucky to be standing here and talking about it and sharing.
And thank you very much for watching.
And be safe.
Be healthy.